Good to see everyone today. And I'll just, while they're doing that, kick off and say hello, I'm Merritt, and I'm from our Met Council CEDS team. And before we jump into the last, to talking about our next three priorities today, I want to share highlights from the breakout discussions from meetings 2 and 3. In addition to the highlights that I'll be sharing, we identified deeper strategies, examples of important initiatives, and important players that will work on these things. After I provide the overview, we'll take 5 to 10 minutes for questions, for reflections from the group, or please feel free to use the chat to share comments as well as we go. Next slide, please. The strategic priority topics discussed in meeting 2 were jobs growth, racial inclusion, and workforce development and skills. Next. The job growth breakout groups identified core strategies such as needing to be intentional about creating good jobs and improving access to jobs. Access can mean skills readiness, knowledge of job opportunities, or physical access via transit or housing proximity. Driving job creation through entrepreneurship and innovation is identified as very important, as is anticipating what the new growth sectors will be and training the future workforce for those. The key partners and organizations to advance the priority strategies are identified on each slide, but in the interest of time, I won't read through them, but you can get a sense of them by taking a look at the slide. The slide deck will be posted to our CEDS website for future reference. Next, please. While the region has made some progress on racial inclusion in recent years, lots of work remains. The work must be integrated into all that we do. Capital access and real estate development are important to move the needle. It's essential that we measure progress beyond data by talking to people about if and how their lives are changing and working collaboratively to adjust strategies and approaches. Next, please. Workforce development strategies are about anticipating opportunities and creating an education pipeline. We must learn from and improve on past workforce approaches and not take a one-size-fits-all approach. Workers can be set up for success if we help address core needs like childcare and transportation. Next. The strategic priorities discussed at meeting 3 were regional brand and image, startups and innovation, and talent migration and attention. What did our group discussions identify for these priorities? Next. Regional brand and image are foundational to some of our key economic strategies to attract talent, venture capital, and industries. The region struggles to, but must communicate a unified brand. There's a lot that's great about our region, and we need to shout it from the rooftops and not be humble. We can and must amplify our message to reach target audiences and prioritize who those audiences are. When we are trying to reach people, we are competing with other places, not just across our nation, but globally. Next, please. What can we do to improve the ecosystem for startups and innovation? Funding and venture capital are essential. Mentorship programs and collaborative networks play an important role. We can expand our infrastructure of incubators and innovation hubs and tap into our diverse pool of entrepreneurs and smooth their path forward by streamlining permitting, licensing, and technical assistance. Next. And finally, on our third from meeting 3, talent migration and retention. We need to help people see that coming and staying here is a great life choice. We can focus messaging to young professionals, digital nomads, and underrepresented populations. Employers can lean into workplace culture, provide relocation assistance, and intern or apprenticeship programs. Bringing people back to the region, such as young adults that went away for schooling, is as important as attracting newcomers. So with that, I'd like to open up to the group and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts or reactions to kind of this high level takeaways we had from the breakout group discussions in meetings 2 and 3. If it's okay, can you just close the slides and we'll go back to the group? Thanks. So anything that anyone wants to share or things that jumped out to you in seeing those summaries? I know when we were in the breakout groups, everybody's sort of in their own room and they get to hear about what's happening there, but then don't have the benefit of hearing what's happening in others. So we just want to take a few minutes there for all of you to see what those conversations had focused on.
So I don't have any reaction to what you reported, but I do have a question about, were there any outliers that you didn't capture that was unique to any one particular group that may have some interest?
Say more what you mean by an outlier. What would be something you'd think of?
I mean, the slides indicate that you took sort of what the commonalities were among the breakout groups. Were there any unique things from any of the groups that, because it wasn't common, that was left off the slide projection?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this was kind of, like you say, taking that big picture, and the notes from the breakout groups are really, really detailed. And I don't know if Bridget or anyone from the U of M team that's really been doing the deep dive into those notes wants to say anything on that, but I know there's a lot there. Bridget?
Yeah, sure. Nothing is coming to mind right away to answer on that question. I will say that as part of this process, what we're doing is we're putting together a little summary, and in that summary is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And in that section of the report, we are capturing basically everything that was said in the breakout session. So while Merritt gave you kind of a nice overview to keep us on track and on schedule today, we are capturing those, even if they aren't, some of them may be a little more creative or a little thinking outside the box kind of things. Those are reflected or will be reflected in the final document.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question or something to share before we move on? All right, well, you've been sent some summary information, and you'll be seeing all of the information from the breakout group discussions, obviously showing up when we start to draft the report. But as always, reach out anytime if something comes to mind or pop something in the chat. And with that, I'd like to thank you, and I will turn it back to our U of M team.
Well, I guess next we are going to talk a little bit about the 3 topics that we are going to focus on today. So that's the new climate economy, transportation and mobility, and affordability. And so I have some data that I was just going to show you, and then give you an opportunity to ask me questions about this data, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms and dive deeper into each of these topics. I'm going to share my screen. And are you all able to see my screen? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. So first I'm going to start with talking about the new climate economy. This topic generally focuses on how the changing climate impacts the economy, and how addressing climate change can provide opportunities for business innovation, entrepreneurship, and workforce development. And I'm sorry, I can't see you all. So if you have a question, you can either just reach out or say something, or you can put it in the chat and someone can let me know what's in the chat. In the 2023-2024 legislative session, the state enacted a policy mandating that all electricity generation be 100% carbon-free by 2040. And this policy is expected to drive significant innovation and investment within the renewable energy industry, and will have an impact on the economic sectors that contribute most to greenhouse gas emissions. So where might we see this policy impacting our region's economy? Here you can see the top 5 economic sectors that emit the largest amount of greenhouse gases. This new policy will have an effect on all of these industries, but specifically the industries with some of the highest emissions, like transportation and electric power. To understand this potential impact, I'm going to show you some of the data on the current state of both transportation and electric power and some of the changes that have happened over the past decade. When we look at the transportation sector, we can see that electric vehicle registrations are on the rise. Electric vehicle ownership is especially high in the Twin Cities metro, with 82% of the state's electric vehicles registered in the metro region. We can also see a shift in electric power generation in Minnesota, especially over the last 20 years. So this here shows the change in the percentage of the change in the percentage of electric power that was generated by different sources. In 2005, coal accounted for 62% of our utility scale electricity generation, and renewables was only 6%. However, by 2025, coal has dropped to only 18%, while renewable energy has gone up to 43%. And one last trend around this new climate economy to look at is the number of clean energy jobs. In 2023, the Twin Cities accounted for over 38,000 clean energy positions, and that represents 62% of the total clean energy jobs in Minnesota. Of these positions, 72% are concentrated in energy efficiency, so that's where most of these jobs are. But there are also jobs in renewable energy, clean transportation, clean fuels, and the energy grid and energy storage. So I'm now going to move on to transportation and mobility, but before I do that, I just wanted to ask if anybody had any questions on the new climate economy, since it is a little broad and there's a lot going on in it. Okay, so when we talk about transportation, there are 2 ways we can think about how we measure our transportation system. First is mobility, and so this focuses on movement of vehicles. It aims for speed and getting there as fast as you can. The region performs very strong when mobility in this measure is used to understand the performance of our regional transportation system. Another way we can look at this is through accessibility. So accessibility measures the ability of people to reach a destination. And it focuses on safety and proximity, aiming for the easiest path rather than the fastest. When I talk about accessibility today, I'll specifically be referring to the number of jobs a person can access within 30 minutes of their home. Also, as a side note, we want to make sure that we're not just thinking about moving people, but also moving goods, because both are important to the region's economy, but both have different needs. So let's first look at moving people. The Twin Cities metro region is a leader in regional accessibility. We're ranked number 1 among our peers for the percentage of the population that is within a 30-minute commute. And that's 68% of our population. And this ranking has held since 2015. So we're doing really well when it comes to general accessibility. However, this ranking is highly supported by the region's high level of accessibility by car. So in these maps, the darker the red, the more jobs that are available within a 30-minute commute of a person's home. This is looking at just commuting by car. So we can see here, job accessibility is high throughout the majority of the metro region, with some lower areas kind of on the edges and those more fringe areas of the region. Job accessibility by car improved during COVID due to less traffic, but has since declined. However, teleworking has helped accessibility remain higher as there are fewer cars on the road during peak hours. When we shift this to look at transit users, you can see there's a big difference between accessibility in transit users and accessibility in those who commute by car. For transit users, teleworking has negatively impacted job accessibility because some suburban commuter routes were cut during COVID. However, this too is also really dependent on where commuters live within the region. Accessibility in the urban core remains much higher than in more suburban areas, although there is some growth near transit expansions like BRT and other types of transit expansion. And while I don't have a map for this, bicycle accessibility is expanding in some of the suburban and more regions closer to the edge of the metro. However, it's still primarily strongest in the urban core, and it's pretty limited to the urban core for accessibility by bike. And so I just wanted to put these two maps next to each other so you could just see that difference between accessibility by car and accessibility by transit. Another way we can look at this, instead of looking at how many jobs a person can access, we can flip the perspective and look at how many people can access a job from a given location. So this map shows how many employees could access a job within 30 minutes of where they live if they were to commute via transit. And so we can see that in the urban core, jobs that are located in the downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul have a lot more accessibility to workers than in some of the other areas. This data can help guide employers to locate areas that are easily reachable for a large number of workers. And as I mentioned before, when we talk about mobility and transportation, we want to make sure we're looking at both the movement of people and the movement of goods, and since they have different preferences and needs that don't always align. And a great example of this is the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Shakopee. Its location is ideal for freight because it's out of the core, it's fewer bottlenecks, less congestion, and a lot of decent parking nearby. But when it comes to workers, fewer workers can access the job, making it harder to find workers willing to commute longer distance for the wages offered. So some of the challenges some of the issues affecting mobility of goods and commerce in the region, they vary by mode. So when we look at trucks, we are looking at challenges including congestion due to lack of designated truck routes and limited truck parking. Trucks often have to travel to Hudson, Norwood Young America, or Rogers to park overnight. For rail, there is a need for more intermodal facilities that have access to parking, as well as the need to protect existing rail-connected industrial land as the region continues to develop. When it comes to aviation, the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport is a strong passenger hub, but it's not a strong cargo hub. This works for small volume, high value cargo, but most other air cargo is trucked to Chicago and flown out from there. For maritime transport, the region is a destination and an origin location with very little pass-through traffic. So this means that we might have different needs than other ports downriver. One issue the region does face is land use concerns, especially again that intermodal land use or intermodal spaces, and a lack of space for cargo and dredging materials. It's also important to consider the economic impact of river tourism and the relationship between tourism and industrial development for maritime freight. And then lastly, with the rise of e-commerce, warehouses and distribution centers are moving to the suburban edge away from demand. And so this leads to longer last mile delivery distances and highlighting the need for for a focus on cargo-oriented industrial development and adaptive reuse of former retail spaces. And so that's what I have for transportation and mobility. I just want to ask if there are any questions, clarifications. Some of these concepts are a little bit different than the way we typically think about them. And so the final topic for today is affordability. So the Twin Cities is more affordable than most of its peer regions. Among its 11 peers, the region ranks second in the share of jobs that pay a family sustaining wage. And it's also the second lowest percentage of cost burden households among the 11 peer regions. So 70% of the households in the region earn a family sustaining wage, and only 32.2% of households are cost burdened. And that is up from 2015. So we've actually reduced the number of cost burdened households. So that's a little bit confusing to say up there. However, the headline doesn't tell the whole story. As we see here, there are more households at or below 30% of area median income than we have housing units that are affordable for them. So here we see that 12% of the region's household make at or below 30% of AMI, while only 7% of the region's housing units are affordable to those who make at or below 30% of the area median income. So while we may be overall more affordable, many of our lowest income residents still struggle to find a place to live. And this chart also clearly shows that disparity between housing cost burden by income level. 89% of extremely low households, so those that make less than 30% AMI, are cost burdened. And that's in stark contrast to the middle and upper class households, so those who make 80% of AMI or higher, where only 7% are cost burdened. And these differences in housing affordability are also having an impact on our region's workforce. Over half the job vacancies in our region are low wage sectors like retail and food service. However, because housing costs are too high for many of those low wage earners, employers are having a difficulty time filling these vacancies because if you can't find housing, you're not going to be able to live here or work here. And that is all that I have today for the data.